I always believed that marriage was about partnership, leaning on each other when things got tough. But lately, it feels like James and I are out of sync. He's become obsessed with money, nitpicking every little thing I buy. Even when I ask if I can pick up groceries, he turns it into an interrogation. I come home feeling like a child being scolded, not a wife being trusted. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was stressed, just a rough patch, I thought. I wanted to be supportive, like I always had been. But every time he snapped at me about wasting money, my resolve chipped away a little more. The man I once saw as my protector started to feel more like my warden. And deep down, there's this nagging suspicion I can't ignore. It's like a small voice in the back of my mind, growing louder every time he criticizes me. Is this really just about budgeting? Or is he trying to control me in ways I'm only beginning to see? I can't help feeling like he's hiding something behind those cold, disapproving eyes. I've started to feel like I'm tiptoeing through my own home, careful not to upset him. Every decision I make, even small ones like what to cook for dinner, feels like a potential argument waiting to happen. It's exhausting, living with that constant sense of caution, like I'm walking on eggshells. I hate that I've begun to second-guess myself, to wonder if I really am as reckless as he says. At night, I lie awake, going over every word he said. There's something about the way he talks about money that doesn't add up. If we're really struggling so much, why does he act like every penny I spend is a personal affront? It doesn't feel like love anymore. It feels like a transaction, like I'm constantly being measured and found lacking. I've tried talking to him, but the conversations always end the same way, with me apologizing for even bringing it up. He brushes me off, saying I'm overreacting or making things up, but my gut tells me there's more to this. I can't prove it yet, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being lied to, that this is about more than just the bills. I've started paying closer attention to the little things. The way he guards his phone like it's a secret, the sudden hush in his voice when he takes calls in the next room. It's enough to make me question everything. Every word, every glance, every promise. My mind feels like it's spinning in circles, trying to piece together the puzzle he won't let me see. It's hard to admit that I'm scared, not of James exactly, but of what I might find if I dig deeper. What if I'm right? What if there's something beneath all his talk of budgeting and frugality, something he doesn't want me to know? The idea terrifies me and sets my heart racing in the same breath. But I can't ignore it anymore. I can feel the cracks widening, the ground shifting under my feet. I don't have the answers yet, but I know one thing. I won't let myself be kept in the dark any longer. And though I don't know what I'll find, I'm ready to pull at every thread until the truth comes out. It all started on a rainy afternoon when I was tidying up the office. I didn't mean to snoop. I was just sorting through the usual mess of bills and receipts. But there it was, tucked in the back of the drawer like it didn't want to be found. A bank statement with James's name on it, but not our shared account. My hands started to shake as I scanned the numbers, my heart pounding in my chest. The account balance didn't make sense. Over $1 million. My breath caught in my throat as I read it again and again, hoping I'd made a mistake. But there it was in black and white, more money than I'd ever imagined. Money he'd told me we didn't have. My mind raced, my thoughts colliding in a blur of disbelief and betrayal. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. All the fights about money, all the nights I went without. It was all a lie. My hands were clammy as I held that paper, feeling like it was burning right through me. And in that moment, I knew that whatever trust I still had in James was gone. I needed to know more. I needed to know the whole story. I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. My fingers trembled as I searched through more of his paperwork, every drawer and file folder a new wave of dread and curiosity. That's when I found them. The transfers to someone I'd never heard of, each note a punch to the gut. For your new car, vacation fund, dinner at La Mer. The words blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. It was like a cruel joke. While I was budgeting for groceries and skipping out on new clothes, he was showering her with luxury. My mind replayed every time he'd told me we couldn't afford to go out, every time he'd shot down my requests with that cold voice. And all along, he'd been living another life, one filled with expensive dinners and fancy gifts for someone else. I couldn't help but feel like a fool, like every word he'd spoken to me had been carefully crafted to keep me in the dark. My heart was a storm of betrayal and anger. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there. But I forced myself to breathe, to hold it all in. I knew that before I confronted him, I needed to be sure. I needed to see it all. I spent hours poring over every scrap of paper, each new discovery a fresh cut that bled a little more of my faith in him. The more I found, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was a deliberate betrayal. I tried to imagine what he was thinking when he sent her those notes, when he took money meant for our home and handed it over to someone else. It made me feel small and disposable, like an afterthought in my own marriage. I remember the final moment that sealed it for me. A note with her name and a payment that was more than I'd spent on myself in the past year. That was when my heartbreak solidified into something else. A steely resolve. He thought he could control me by keeping me in the dark, but now I had the truth in my hands. I wasn't going to let him bury it again. I still didn't know exactly how I'd confront him, but I knew I couldn't let it slide. I wouldn't let myself be silenced or gaslighted anymore. And as I closed the drawer and took one last look at the mountain of lies he'd built, I promised myself that I'd get the answers I needed, no matter how painful they were. I knew I couldn't confront him unprepared, so I began documenting everything. Late at night, when he was asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop, scrolling through bank statements and messages. Each screenshot felt like a tiny rebellion, proof that I wasn't as powerless as he wanted me to feel. I saved every detail, every dollar he spent behind my back, every word he wrote to her. It was painstaking work, and every new discovery cut deeper. I learned about the spa days he paid for, the fancy dinners, the weekend getaways. My mind flashed back to the nights he told me we couldn't afford takeout, when I'd eaten toast and tea instead. It was like living in two different worlds, mine, of constant worry, and his, of reckless luxury. But even as the pain grew, so did my determination. Each piece of evidence was a piece of my sanity, a way to take back control. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it all yet, but I knew I needed it. It was the only way to face him without letting him turn the tables on me again. Every night felt like a secret mission. I'd sit there in the glow of the computer screen, my pulse steady, my breath slow and even. It was almost like I was seeing James for the first time. Not the man I thought I married, but the man who could lie so easily, who could look me in the eye and still keep so much hidden. That realization was the hardest part, knowing how easily he could pretend. But I didn't let it break me. I let it fuel me. The more I learned, the more it all made sense. The late nights at the office that were really dinners with her, the business trips that lined up perfectly with the dates on those hotel receipts. I was done blaming myself for his lies, done making excuses for a man who didn't deserve them. The contrast between his two lives was staggering, and it made me sick to my stomach. I'd been living with a stranger, and every lie he told had built a wall between us that I was finally tearing down. I kept at it, night after night, because I needed to know everything, not just for me, but to reclaim my life from the web of deceit he'd spun. I started to feel a shift inside me, like I was standing on firmer ground. No longer just the quiet wife who swallowed every apology and let him dictate the rules. I was finally seeing the truth for what it was, and it made me stronger. I stopped blaming myself for being blind. I realized that he'd made it his mission to keep me that way. But now the blinders were gone. Every screenshot, every note, was a piece of a puzzle he never wanted me to solve. And with each piece I found, I felt my fear turn into something else. Resolve. I knew I couldn't let this go. I needed to confront him, to let him see that I wasn't the woman he thought he could control anymore. But I also knew I had to be smart. He'd always been so good at twisting things, at turning my words against me. This time, I wouldn't give him that chance. As I closed my laptop and shut off the lamp, I made a promise to myself. When the time came, I'd be ready, and I wouldn't let him make me feel small ever again. I waited for the perfect moment. The day he came home from work looking relaxed, unsuspecting, like nothing could possibly be wrong. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept my face calm. I didn't want to give him even a hint of how ready I was to end the charade. I asked him to sit down, and for a moment he looked puzzled, maybe even a little amused. He had no idea what was coming. I took out the stack of bank statements, laying them in front of him like a hand of cards he couldn't deny. My voice was steady as I asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. How could you do this to me? The silence that followed was deafening, a pause that seemed to stretch on forever as he stared at the evidence laid out before him. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by the same cold deflection he'd used so many times before. He tried to laugh it off, to act like I was overreacting. But this time, I didn't flinch. I wasn't that same woman anymore, and he was about to learn that the hard way. He launched into his excuses like I knew he would, claiming it was just a misunderstanding, that I was snooping and twisting things. But every word he said sounded hollow, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. My hands were steady on the table, even though my heart was racing. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, but I refused to let him see me cry. I told him that I wasn't here for explanations or justifications. I was done with his lies and his games. Each word I spoke felt like I was shedding another layer of the fear he'd wrapped around me. I could see the shift in his eyes, that flicker of uncertainty as he realized he couldn't control the narrative anymore. For once, he was the one on the back foot. He tried to turn it back on me, like he always had, said I was making a scene, that I was embarrassing myself. But I didn't let it sink in. I didn't let him twist it around. My voice was calm, my shoulders square. I told him I was done living in the dark, done pretending that his version of reality was the truth. And as I spoke, I felt something break open inside me, something that had been waiting for far too long to be free. He didn't have anywhere to hide anymore, not with the papers right there, the truth staring him in the face. I watched him squirm, watched the lies falter on his lips, and in that moment, I realized I didn't care what he had to say. I didn't need his apologies or his excuses. I needed my freedom. I told him plainly that I was done, that I'd be talking to a lawyer, that I'd no longer be his puppet, dancing to whatever story he wanted me to believe. I said it calmly, like I was telling him the weather, but inside, I felt a fire I hadn't felt in years. It was like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd almost forgotten existed. He tried one last time to plead, to make me doubt what I knew, but I stood up, gathered the papers, and looked him in the eye. There was nothing left for him to say, and nothing left for me to hear. I left him sitting there with his lies and his empty words, ready to start the next chapter of my life, one where I finally called the shots. Walking out of that house was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most liberating. I packed my things, only what truly belonged to me, and left the rest behind. The air outside felt different, like I was breathing freely for the first time in years. I didn't look back at the door as it closed behind me. That chapter was over, and I wasn't going to let it define who I was anymore. I found a small apartment of my own, a space that was just mine. The first night there, I made myself a simple dinner and sat at the kitchen table in the soft light of a lamp, feeling an unexpected sense of peace. No one was there to question me, to second-guess my choices. It was quiet, almost too quiet at first, but it was my quiet, and I was learning to savor it. I reconnected with old friends, people who reminded me that I was more than the woman who'd been controlled and manipulated. They didn't look at me with pity. They saw someone who'd finally decided to take her life back. Every conversation felt like another step away from the shadow of who I used to be, another piece of myself coming back into the light. I knew there was still so much to figure out. I met with a lawyer and a financial advisor, determined to protect myself and reclaim what I was owed. It felt overwhelming at times, the paperwork, the legal jargon, the mountain of things to sort through. But every step forward was a reminder that I was in control now. No one was going to decide my future, but me. The days felt different now, lighter somehow. I'd start the mornings with a cup of coffee on my balcony, letting the sun warm my face as I planned my day. It sounds small, but it meant everything to me. There was no one to answer to, no questions to dodge, no scrutiny hanging over my head. Just me and the quiet promise that I was enough. I even started doing things just for me again, buying a dress I didn't have to justify, cooking meals I'd always wanted to try. Little acts of defiance that felt like declarations of freedom. It wasn't about the money or the stuff, it was about reclaiming the parts of myself I'd been forced to give up. And with each new step, I felt a little more like the woman I'd always hoped to be. I won't pretend that it was all easy. Some nights I still woke up in the dark with memories of his voice echoing in my mind. But every time that happened, I reminded myself that I'd survived. I'd walked away from the lies and the betrayal, and I hadn't looked back. There was strength in that, in choosing myself, in choosing my own happiness. I started to find beauty in the small things again. A morning walk without needing permission, a quiet evening spent with a book that made me smile. Even something as simple as lighting a candle at night felt like a small victory, a reminder that my home was my own now, a place of safety, not of control. And that was worth more than any dollar amount. Looking back, I know that leaving James wasn't just about walking away from him, it was about walking toward myself. And as I stood there in my new apartment, the weight of the past finally behind me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The future was mine to write now, and I was ready to fill it with light, laughter, and all the things I'd once been too afraid to reach for.